It's midnight. The wind howls through the cracks, sharp like knives slipping under the door. Your fire dead, and that woodpile you counted on buried under 6 feet of snow. Now, picture this. A family on the American frontier. Winter of 1886, one of the worst blizzards ever recorded. In some towns, the snow drifted 20 feet high. Folks couldn't even open their cabin doors. No wood, no hope. Not exactly. They didn't just curl up and wait. They adapted. They used what they had: corn husks, dried grass, even buffalo chips. Not for dinner, mind you, but enough to keep a family alive till morning. So, here's the question. If it were you tonight, no firewood, would you make it through till dawn? Step inside that old frontier cabin for a moment. The walls are rough-hewn logs. The wind whistles through every crack. Drafts cutting through the cabin like knives. Snow is piling high outside. Not just a dusting, we're talking drifts taller than a man. In the winter of 1886, some parts of Dakota Territory saw snow stacked 20 feet deep. 20 feet. Folks kept shovels inside their cabins just so they could dig their way out. Now, picture the family, huddled together, mother wrapping the youngest in quilts, father pacing, listening to the timbers creak. They can hear the wolves in the distance, but the real enemy is the cold. Here's the truth about frontier life. There was no backup plan, no hardware store down the road, no propane tank sitting out back. If the woodpile ran out, that was it. You either froze or you fought back with whatever you had left. And that's the part that always sticks with me. These families didn't have much, but they had grit. And grit was often the difference between life and death. No wood, no hope, not exactly. Because survival wasn't about having everything you wanted. It was about using everything you had. Corn husks, straw, even buffalo chips. Doesn't sound pretty, does it? But when the temperature drops below zero, you stop worrying about pretty. You start worrying about tomorrow. So, if you were there in that cabin, snow pressing against the door, the fire gone cold, what would you do? When the woodpile was gone, families didn't just give up. They looked around. They asked themselves, what will burn? What can keep us alive? First on the list, buffalo chips, dried dung. Out on the prairie, there were miles of open grass, but not a tree in sight. So native tribes and later the settlers gathered what the bison left behind. Sun-dried, stacked high, hauled home in wagons. Doesn't smell great, doesn't look great, but it burned steady. One pioneer woman in Kansas wrote in her journal, buffalo chips made a clear, hot fire. No smoke, no soot, and no need to chop. Not bad for something you had to step over on the trail. Buffalo chips. Not for dinner, but for the stove. Next, corn cobs, husks, and stalks. Frontier families grew corn by the acre. After harvest, they were left with mountains of cobs and piles of stalks. Waste to some, but fuel to those who knew better. Dry corn cobs burned fast, perfect for boiling a kettle or cooking bread. Stalks and husks bundled tight, twisted together. Farmers called it fodder fuel. Weak heat, yes, but it could keep embers alive through the night. And when the fields were empty, they turned to grass. Twisted grasses woven into thick bundles rolled into what folks called hay logs. It took time. It took patience. You had to twist them tight, or else they vanished in a flash. But done right, a hay log could burn long enough to keep frost from settling in your bones. None of these fuels were pretty. None of them burned like oak or hickory. But out on the frontier, survival wasn't about pretty. It was about possible. Picture the scene. A father drops corn cobs into a dying stove. The mother twists hay with raw hands, feeding it slowly to the coals. The children huddle, breath white in the air, waiting for warmth to return. Not comfort, not luxury, just enough to keep hearts beating till dawn. No wood, no hope. Not exactly, because the frontier spirit was about adaptation, about seeing fuel where others only saw trash, about using what you had not, mourning what you didn't. So I'll ask you, if your woodpile vanished tonight, buried under 6 feet of snow, what would you burn first? Corn husks, grass? Would you even try buffalo chips, ugly fuel? Sure, but ugly fuel just might save your skin. Snow, cold, merciless, and everywhere. To the frontier family, it was the enemy. But here's the twist, it could also be a shield. Snow insulation. Settlers learned to pack snow tight against the outside walls of their cabins. Sounds backwards, doesn't it? But snow is an insulator. A thick frozen wall blocked the drafts that cut through the cabin like knives. More than one diary from the Dakota Territory mentions families shoveling snow up to the windows just to keep the howling wind out. Strange trick, but it worked. Inside, every ounce of warmth had to be stretched. And when wood was gone, the family leaned on each other, literally. Sleeping shifts. One person tended whatever embers remained while the rest slept. Then they switched. That way, no one sat up all night wasting precious energy. Efficiency was survival. And then the old frontier standby, the family pile. Everyone under one quilt. Layers of wool, patched blankets, maybe even an old bearskin. Skin to skin, breath to breath. It wasn't comfortable, and it sure wasn't private, but it was warm. Body heat multiplied. A frontier furnace made of flesh and bone. Still, the cold crept up from below. The floor of a cabin was a thief stealing warmth without mercy. So they fought back with layered bedding. Straw, dry leaves, even rag rugs piled thick under their backs. Settlers called them haytick sacks stuffed with straw, lumpy but life-saving. A barrier between flesh and frozen ground. Here's the wisdom: they didn't just make heat. They kept it. They trapped it. Because once heat slips away, you almost never get it back. Frontier life hammered that lesson in hard. No wood, no hope. Not exactly. See, survival was less about fire and more about discipline, guarding warmth like treasure, using snow as armor, turning quilts and straw into weapons against the cold. So let me ask you, if your fire died tonight, would you think to shovel snow against your walls? Would you pack straw under your back, or would you just sit there shivering, waiting for morning? Sometimes the difference between freezing and waking up alive is nothing more than one clever idea. Sometimes survival came down to the smallest tricks, little things that made the difference between freezing and making it till morning. First, sealing the drafts. Those old log cabins weren't airtight. Wind sliced through the cracks like a knife. Families would stuff rags, moss, even newspaper into the gaps. But here's the clever part. Sometimes they'd wet the cloth first, let it freeze solid in place. The ice itself became a seal. Strange solution, maybe, but a frozen rag in the wall was better than an open wound bleeding heat. Second, the root cellar. Every farm had one, dug deep, lined with stone, packed with shelves of potatoes and turnips. But in a blizzard, that cellar became more than storage. Down there, the temperature stayed steady cold, but never deadly cold. Families huddled among the bins, breathing together, waiting out the worst. Not comfortable, but steady beats, deadly every single time. And then the stones. If you had even a flicker of fire left, you used it to heat rocks. Big ones, smooth if possible. You pulled them from the hearth with tongs, wrapped them in cloth, slid them under the blankets. Frontier folks called it the poor man's hot water bottle. Not fancy, but a glowing stone by your feet could mean the difference between frostbite and waking up with 10 toes still attached. No wood, no hope. Not exactly, because the frontier mind didn't stop at one idea. It kept searching, plugging cracks with ice, sleeping in the root cellar, hugging a stone for warmth. Survival wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, practical, sometimes downright ugly, but it worked. And that's the lesson, isn't it? When the chips are down, buffalo chips or otherwise, you don't wait for perfect. You use what you've got. So if the storm hit tonight, fire gone, wind screaming through the walls, would you think to freeze a rag in the cracks? Would you move your family into the cellar? Would you trust a stone to guard your toes? Sometimes survival is nothing more than a bag of tricks, passed down from those who refuse to quit. Now, what does all this mean for us today? We're not huddled in a log cabin on the prairie. We've got furnaces, thermostats, propane tanks, Amazon Prime. But here's the thing. Storms still come. Grids still fail. And when they do, the old lessons matter. Pellets. They're the modern cousin of corn cobs. Compressed sawdust, easy to store, steady to burn. Stack a few bags in your garage and you've got a lifeline if the propane runs out. Hay logs, still around. You can twist dry grasses or, better yet, buy compressed straw logs at farm supply stores. Cheap, renewable, ugly fuel, sure, but ugly fuel keeps you alive. Candle heaters. You've probably seen them, a few clay pots stacked over tea lights. Won't heat a mansion, but in a small room, it takes the edge off. Frontier families knew the trick. Sometimes you don't heat the house, you just heat you. Reflective blankets. Lightweight, shiny, the kind preppers stash everywhere. Wrap one around you or tack it to the wall behind a candle and suddenly you've doubled the heat. Native ingenuity in a foil wrapper. And here's the lesson. Survival isn't fire. It's control. Control of heat. Control of wind. Control of your mindset. Think back to those families. Snow outside. Wolves in the distance. No firewood in reach. They didn't quit. They didn't panic. They looked around and they used what they had. No wood. No hope. Not exactly. So let me throw this challenge your way. Could you do it one night? No wood. Just what's in your house right now. No cheating. No quick store run. Could you keep the room above freezing? Could you keep your family breathing steady till morning? It's worth thinking about, because storms haven't stopped. Cold hasn't stopped, and when the lights go out, history has a way of repeating itself. So I'll ask you again, could you pass the no wood test? Let me leave you with a true story. Winter of 1880 in Nebraska. A blizzard swept across the plains, dropping snow so fast that whole towns disappeared under drifts. One frontier family, a father, a mother, 3 kids found themselves trapped. The woodpile buried, the stove cold. They didn't quit. They adapted. The father dug out a sack of corn cobs left from harvest, dry, brittle, quick burning. He fed them one by one into the stove. Not much heat, but enough to keep embers alive. The mother spread straw thick across the floor, then pulled every quilt they owned over the children. She pressed them close together, cheek to cheek, sharing breath, trading body heat. And through that night, while the storm howled outside, they endured. They burned what little they had. They slept shoulder to shoulder, and by dawn, they were still alive. That's the payoff right there. Survival wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was grit. They didn't quit. They adapted. And that's survival. And you know, I can't help but wonder, if you were in their shoes, what would you have done? No wood. No hope. Not exactly. Because hope shows up in strange places, in corn cobs, in straw, in the warmth of another human being. So here's my challenge to you. Next time the storm hits and the lights flicker out, think like they did. Don't wait for perfect. Don't panic. Use what you've got, because sometimes what you've got is enough. And now I'll turn it over to you. Got a trick up your sleeve when the wood runs out? Drop it in the comments. Somebody out there might thank you this winter.